This episode is sponsored by the Pisgah Coaching Institute, founded by IFS-trained master coach Brian Jeanne, who has been a pioneer in the integration of IFS and coaching for more than 2 decades. You can work with an IFS-informed coach who personally trained with Brian to clarify and live into a vision of any kind. Check out PCI's affiliate coaching program at pisgahcoaching.com. That is PISGAH coaching.com. Welcome to Season 6 of the One Inside an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm Tammy Sollenberger, author of The One Inside, 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. This podcast is for anyone curious about their inner world and who have a desire to connect to that authentic self. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I am so excited today to have Jeanne Catanzaro on the podcast. Jeanne is an author of this new book called Unburdened Eating. Jeanne, let's start where we always start, which is where you are in the world and what do you see when you look out your nearest window?
I am just north of Chicago in Wilmette, close to Evanston, and I'm looking out at the trees. We live about 2 blocks from Lake Michigan. And so this morning I went for a long walk on the beach, and just a really pretty place to be.
Do you get, okay, this is probably a stupid like East Coast girl question, but do you get shells on the beach?
No shells.
No shells.
But I always thought of Lake Michigan being like a lake until I actually visited. And it really, to me, to my East Coast self, because I grew up on Long Island, it looks like it could be the East Coast, minus the shells. Just a little bit of seaweed, not very much of that. It's not seaweed, obviously, because it's not the sea, but there's some green stuff, but mostly not, but it's amazing. It's really looks just because the lake is so huge. So it looks just like the East Coast, and sometimes gets wavy enough that it looks just like the beaches I grew up with. So it's really, really nice. It's really hard not to feel grounded when I start my day with a walk on the beach.
If I started my day grounded on the beach, I wonder if my eating would be different that day.
I couldn't imagine it wouldn't help. And I think that's part of the thing for a lot of people is we don't have that. We're catapulted into our lives. We don't have that moment of grounding or those moments of grounding, that big, literal big sky kind of moment, which connects us to our self-energy much more.
I love that. So you and I talked before about your amazing book and the idea that people that have done will do lots of therapy and lots of unburdenings and lots of work on themselves and never even think or consider to do work on their eating, body image, all those parts. So tell me a little bit about that, because I know that's part of the reason why you wrote the book. But so tell me about this idea that some of us tend to just kind of exile all those parts.
Mm-hmm. But, as we were talking about, I think most of us actually just think this is the way it is, right? That we're meant to feel a certain amount of shame or anxiety about our bodies, or always be trying to improve them or change them, such that we don't even think it's a problem that we're walking around with parts who are pretty much regularly thinking about, there's something wrong here, I need to change. And so I think a lot of people can do a lot of very deep work, heal a lot. And then there's this section over here, this, of course, which relates to so much of our emotional well-being, the relationship we have with food and our bodies. And we're not exploring it. And in part, we're not exploring it because the people we're working with aren't curious either, because of the burdens that they carry, the messages that they've internalized about bodies, about food, and their preoccupation with both of them. So it doesn't occur to a lot of therapists to get curious about trailheads or moments where clients are coming in with a strong feeling or a belief about food or the body and getting curious about it and helping them explore it. Right. So
yeah.
And
so
I was just going to add that a lot of times therapists shy away from because of parts who have concerns, who are caretaking or don't want to make others feel comfortable. There's a lot about the body that we don't get curious about in therapy. Sex also, right? Intimacy, food. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that about sex, right? It's I'm not asking them about sex. I'm not asking them about either their diet, like not just like a diet, like lose weight diet, but just a diet of like, oh, how are you eating? Like I might ask about caffeine, right? If you're anxious, I'm gonna say, okay, well, how much caffeine are you taking or drinking or, taking in? But I'm not asking, what's your diet like and how is that affecting your mental
Well,
health?
right. Or somebody comes in and says, I haven't eaten all day. And it, instead of it being, again, a point where you might get curious and, get curious about why or why not. But then also, how does it impact you when you don't eat all day? And people really don't make that connection. I'm glad you brought up anxiety, because very often people don't consider that it actually makes the body anxious not to eat all day, because our bodies are meant to, to be fed. And we can suppress our hunger. We can tell ourselves that we shouldn't want to eat or that we shouldn't eat, that it would be healthier for us not to eat, until 12 or 2, and we can minimize the impact of that. But it really does make our bodies are biologically driven to need to eat. It's a survival-based instinct. And so going against what is natural in that way does create certainly it creates tension, but it creates a certain amount of anxiety also.
What's funny as you're talking, because I've got parts that are like, I, the idea that eating to me is such a like diet culture thing. So as soon as like if I was to hear someone say I didn't eat all day, there's a part of me that's like, oh, good for them. How did they not eat all day? Like it's like my diet parts. Like if I had all my diet parts around the table, like you talk about, I would have parts being like, ooh, find out what they did. That's terrible. But like that's kind of where my parts would go.
Well, I love that you could acknowledge that. And I hope the part that says it's terrible gives you a break, because the fact of the matter is it's such a big part of why people aren't exploring some of these issues in greater depth in therapy, because we're all carrying burdens related to food in our body. I don't meet anybody who doesn't have some sort of fear, shame, or anxiety about their bodies. And it's very common for therapists to have a part of them who feels jealous when somebody comes in and says, I've lost X pounds or I haven't eaten all day. And, we were absorbing these cultural legacy burdens around discipline and this idea that if we just work hard enough, we can have the bodies we want. And so it's reasonable, right, that we would have parts that would be feeling, wait, how come I can't do that? What's wrong with me that I can't exert the same kind of willpower? So I think being open and kind of acknowledging that and then being more aware of those parts when they come up in your work with clients and not making them bad is really helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that you're right. Like part of us as therapists or practitioners doing our own work is to notice those parts that come up in therapy with our clients. But when it's food and body, like I'm just realizing this now, which I feel like is, again, here's a critic coming in. It's like, so stupid, you didn't realize this now. But I'm like, okay, guys, it's fine. That when it comes to food and body, it's like that doesn't happen in therapy. That's where I'm like, oh, what did you do? And oh my gosh, you lost 5 pounds. That's great. Like yeah. So it's interesting. It's interesting to think about the what happens inside of me.
Well, it's also, you have somebody who's coming in celebrating having lost 5 pounds. And so even if you are aware of the burdens that could reflect, that may reflect, you may also have parts who are reluctant to actually explore that too much, lest the client feel anything about it. Right? They feel good about it. And I'm going to come in and say, are you curious about that? The part who is really happy about that, right? I mean, that is a challenging moment for therapists. And a lot of therapists what they're not considering is there's a part that's celebrating the weight loss and very likely other parts who know the story well. It's not their first time at this rodeo, right? They've noticed when a part has celebrated weight loss and then notice what happens when other parts, rebel at a certain period of time because they get tired of the restriction or their bodies, just do what bodies do 95 to 99% of the time with intentional weight loss, which is they fight to regain the lost weight. So yeah. So there's a lot that happens in these moments, and being as curious as you can, just as a human being, but then also as a human being who's got this dual role of also being a therapist is so important.
Yeah, I love that. What about this idea of like your body? You said this earlier, something like your body's like we don't have to fix it. Like what if we lived with this idea of like, I'm not in a state of always having to fix my body, like wake up every day and think about, I'm going to eat good today, or, I'm going to make sure I do this today. Or, like, I honestly can't imagine what it would be like to not have like my body as a project. Like, and so even the idea of unburdened eating, I was like, is that a possible thing? It doesn't even feel like a possible thing. So
Yeah.
tell me about that.
Well, yeah, I think you're not alone. I mean, I think so many people are just convinced that it's just an impossibility to not. And not only is it an impossibility to live in a way where you're not constantly trying to fix or change yourself, but it's also it's not morally, it's not okay actually, right?
Right.
It's actually
Right.
the right thing to do. It's your responsibility. You have a body. What are you doing to take care of it? I mean, so I think that you've got a lot of company, and really not imagining that's possible to unburden, to the point where, we talk a lot about the continuum of being self-led in anything and being led by the self, not versus being in self. So when we talk about unburdened eating, it's about being able to heal the parts who took on burdens related to food in the body or other traumatic experiences or painful experiences that lead them to focus on food in the body or disconnect, such that you can be led more and more by the self. And then even then, you're going to be negotiating between the different parts who have different agendas. A part who wants to go out for a bike ride, and another one that says, I just want to stay on the couch. It's like there's just naturally going to be conflicting agendas, conflicting wants and needs. But when they're not yoked to exiles or holding burdens related of shame, worthlessness, and fear, it becomes much easier to access your self-energy, your core wisdom about what your parts want and need. And things become a lot more harmonious. And that's what we're talking about with unburdened eating, that it's a process. And I just want to say one more thing, which is we're just steeped in this idea that, in terms of white supremacist culture, of everything should be linear, progress-oriented. Hard work is everything. If you just keep working, you get what you want and what you want basically, and what you should have. And the fact is, our bodies they change. They're always changing. We can pretty much be guaranteed they don't at a certain point get better. If we're looking at better as, increased strength or increased fitness or, increased beauty in terms of cultural standards, we can pretty much be guaranteed that we're all going to face this trajectory where we're not moving forward, if that's, in terms of how the parts see it and what we're taught. So
That's amazing. So I'm like laughing. What comes up for me is this idea that I've been feeling lately is like you just said, taking care of your body. And so now that I'm 50, like taking care of my body from probably 8 until 40-ish, it was about losing weight or looking a certain way. Like that was taking care of your body. It wasn't like having vegetables. You know what I mean? It wasn't like having energy or having no pain or anything like that. But now that I'm 50, I'm feeling a little bit more like I want to make sure that I can get in and out of a car. Like I want to make sure that I age with strength. Like this idea of like taking care of your body. I've even had conversations with people that are older, like, actually you don't want to be older and really thin. That's not what you want to do. Like, so it's this really interesting thing as you get older. Like, actually I want my body to be able to move. Like that's what's important to me. That's like to have strength and be able to move. So this taking care of your body feels like it's kind of loaded. Like there's lots of different meanings that happen as you even say that.
Yeah, and I just want to name from the outset that if we, taking care of the body can just become a substitute for losing weight, in that it's a moral imperative to take care of your body. What that means for a lot of people means, okay, now instead of losing weight, what I need to do is be focusing on how many weight-bearing exercises I can add to my day, right? I mean, so what we want to do is if we can invite curiosity about the shoulds and what kind of behaviors at any age cause us to view our body as a project and with a whole list of shoulds, as opposed to what are the practices that support me and my body, my parts and my body. If you are in an incredible time of stress and have unbelievable demands on yourself, the most compassionate thing that you might be able to do is to not do all those things that you should be doing, that you think other parts think you should be doing. We're always considering, and thankfully, people are starting to focus on rest as an important activity. It's something that we really need, but people still tend to have a relationship with rest as something that I engage in order to gear up for the next should, right? The next thing I can do. And so I do think taking care is considering all of the different parts and what they need, right? Emotionally, physically, and as much as possible being with yourself as you are now, not as you were 10 or 20 years ago, or the image you have of how you should be, as a grandparent or an elder, etc.
Yeah, you talked about how, like, well, this is what I looked like when I was in high school, or this is what I looked like 5 years ago, or this is what I used to look like, and how that actually doesn't, those are critical parts that, not that it doesn't matter, but it's like we can kind of get stuck. That can be part of the taking care of the body, is getting stuck in, like, I used to look like this, and that's why my body's such a project because I need to look like this again or something, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's unrealistic first. It's not achievable. I can't possibly look the way I did when I was 30. So that's one thing, right? It's Sisyphean and pits me against myself and keeps my parts in a constant struggle. And there was something else I was going to say about it, though. It's just like it's not a kind way to live with yourself. And it doesn't support you as you are now. And it really keeps you very disconnected from your body, and it really takes a toll. It takes a toll. Even if you can achieve what you think you should be achieving, it's still at a great cost to many other parts of your system.
Yeah. One of the things I love about your book is you talk about, like, really getting to know the critics first. And I think I said this to you before, that it feels like the critics feel like so blended. But it's interesting with other aspects of my life, and I think this is true for a lot of people. I'm really aware of what's blended and what's not. But when it comes to eating, I'm not self-led at all. I'm very aware of a critic, and I'm aware of the part that wants to eat the food, or the sort of it's really hard. It's hard. I'm saying a lot right now, but I feel like it's hard to be self-led because I feel very blended with these main players.
That's right. Well, you are, because you don't even notice them because it's just part of our common parlance. Right? You're getting these messages from the time you arrive here about the shoulds and how you should, about at every developmental stage, from so many different sources about which bodies are good bodies, considered superior, and why. Healthy, fit, thin, white, right, young. All these, the ways in which, cisgender. And so you're getting all these ideas that these are the ideal bodies. These are the bodies we should be striving for. I mean, at a certain point, it occurred to me, I think I was in college and realizing that, I'm never going to be blonde, and I'm never going to be, 5, 6, or 7 and super thin. Right? Those were all things that were just not within my grasp. Right. And there are, so, but every time we turn on the TV, or very often when we're reading the newspaper, a lot right now about how we need to get rid of fatness, so we're steeped in it. So we don't even notice it. And then we're talking to everybody else, and everybody else has these ideas about, oh, we should be healthy. This idea that our worth is connected again to our ability to be healthy, right? And that's relative to the individual, and also a lot of access issues related to health. Who gets to be healthy? Who has access to the resources that support health and well-being? And so yeah, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, which is to really start helping people get curious about the different shoulds, because critics, the part that says, oh, you're so fat, that's one critic. But there are more subtle manifestations of that part that, again, wakes you up when you say you wake up and thinking about how can I be better today, right? It's really quite a position from which to start your day, already in a deficit.
Right. Already critical
Yeah.
and manage driven. Like, okay, this is what, and focus on something that part of me is like, do I really want to be focused on that? Like, there's so many other really cool things to be focused on. Like,
Well,
that's what I'm
yeah,
focusing on the first thing when I wake up.
totally. And now it's like, did I sleep enough? I never were, but now it's a real problem. Like, did I sleep enough, and did I do enough to sleep enough, or did I get off my screen earlier enough? That's like our
Right.
critics have and so many different opportunities, and of course they relate to, these protectors are relating, and there's so many reasons for this, so much vulnerability, uncertainty about the world, uncertainty, climate change, politics. There's so many things that focusing on, I'm going to fix this is how I'm going to do it, gets you away from,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So is this true that there are times where I'm like a little bit more focused on eating in my body, and I've
Mm-hmm.
often thought like, is this a distraction? Like, is this just a familiar? Like, oh, I'm so used to this problem, since I was 8, that like, it's easier because it's so familiar for me to kind of hang out with those parts instead of hang out with parts that are worried about politics or climate change or the holidays, which we could talk about, and family and things like that. That it's like, I'm just going to hang out with these familiar parts because they're all upset and I'm used to their upset.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I
Yeah.
think so. And then the next new plan brings in a little bit of hope, right? And there is a relief at thinking, okay, if I just do this, if I just focus on getting this much sleep, this much water, this much movement, there's a relief. I mean, I
And
just want to
protein,
appreciate.
Gene,
And
protein, this
protein.
much
It was a
protein.
really, really, really great, I'm sure you've seen them on Instagram, where this woman is saying things like, you need to get enough protein, but not too many calories. But I mean, it's just a chain of things. And it's great because it just points out the impossibility. But I just want to say I have great respect for protectors who focus on food in the body. They're working really hard, and they provide a lot of they each provide their own brief relief.
Oh, I
Right?
love that. Brief relief.
It's like
Yeah.
pain relief, and it's brief, but they're trying their best.
Yeah. I love
You
that.
know, and in the culture we're in, they have valid reasons for fearing easing up or letting go of their strategies. Because there's
Yes.
so, to your point before about, why is it so hard to unblend from these critics? Because there's so much positive reinforcement for them.
Right. So if you're going to go home at the holidays and, mom and grandmom are going to say, oh, wow, you lost weight. You must be like, there's going to be body comments, or there's not going to be any body comments. And you know what that means. Like,
Or if you
that's a
get you get
problem.
the up and down,
Oh, yeah.
which I don't get, but a lot of my clients talk about that. They can, they get sized up in a minute,
Oh,
when they
yeah.
arrive home.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what size I am, that still happens. Like body comments are made always when I go home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it triggers parts of me that'll either be like, give me, I don't care, like sort of these sassy parts that are like a little rebellious and like, give me all the M&Ms and I'm going to eat them in front of you.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right. That's right. I have a friend who years ago, we were in graduate school, and her family used to do this to her, and we went to her house for Hanukkah, and her dad from across the room started waving his finger at us like we were eating too many chocolate-covered macadamia nuts. And I said to her, and this is way before IFS, but I said to her, oh my gosh, now I have a sense of what it's like for you, because I immediately noticed what I wanted to do, and I think was eat like a whole handful of them, because it felt so bad, of course, to have that judgment, Oh, sure, that's the whole dynamic we all get in, or lots of us get into.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So tell me about this. I was joking with you about a part of me that was like, let me just go to the eating plan in the book. So I'm just going to flip back to the
self-led
where
eating
is
and
it? There we
well-being.
go. Yeah. Developing a self-led eating and well-being practice, which is disappointing because it's at the end of the book. So I was like, yep, I know IFS. Yeah. Let me just get to this chapter.
I know, it's so funny. I put it at the end of the book because because I trust that the managers are going to seize upon it as some way to get in control, some way to either lose weight or improve things,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
and they can, I mean, all of that can be used in that way. But what the book, it's the second to last chapter, because the thing that's most important for me is develop these relationships, befriending the protectors, and really getting to know their fears and starting to help them trust that there can be an alternative. And the point that making the point also too that this is something, we can't wait till we unburden to then eat and move our bodies and rest. It's all happening at the same time. So what I'm doing is laying out the most important thing is to get to know which parts of these protectors protecting by focusing on food in the body and healing as many of the exiles as possible, such that the protectors can either ease up or shift out of their roles. And the more you can do that, then having a self-led eating and well-being practice is much easier. It still will help you identify places where you can continue to unburden. And what it does is helps you really get curious about when you have a part coming in that's dictating a certain agenda related to food in the body, and starting to discern more and more what's a self-led agenda versus one that's coming from a part. And also really taking stock of what does my body right now, my body at my current age with my current demands in my life, what do I in my body, right? Our parts embody the body. It's not like our body's telling us, our parts are telling us when we listen in, right? Our parts are letting and from self, we negotiate with the different parts so that we can, in real time, right? Not with a future aspirational kind of view or a retro. It's more like what kind of activities support my body right now, and can I work internally to cultivate more harmony and more often than not engaging those practices? And can I also curate an external environment that supports that as much as possible? Right, because that's a part of it.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm hearing a couple of things. One is my manager could just flip to that chapter, but it's going to be manager driven and it's going to be just like another diet, and that's not going to work, which we all know. So I really appreciated the idea of just getting to know my critics first, and then really just kind of peeling kind of who's here, like who's at the table. And you do a great job of getting so many examples. There's this amazing chart about kind of all the different parts, like it's not just sort of dieting parts. It just, you give a great list of all the different types of parts that can be at the table. And so it sounds like that really is the place to start. It's just who's here. And before we can even begin to separate sort of like, because it's really hard for me to separate what do I self want. Like, I don't want to be obsessed with food or my body. Like, you know what I mean? But then it's sort of like, how do I do that? Then, so, yeah.
You mean like, so I don't want to be obsessed, but what happens when that part relaxes back a bit?
There's fear.
Right. Right. And then noticing the parts who are afraid and what are they afraid of? And very often the parts have a lot of the fears are well-founded, that when a critic or a part that's been obsessed has relaxed back a bit, like so when a manager relaxes, what their previous experience is that you've been dominated either by exiles or a firefighter, the parts they're polarized with. And so really, step by step, help, pausing that sequence and intervening from self to be able to acknowledge both sides of the polarity and help so that you're developing trust much more, that because the parts don't know there's a self, and very often they really don't trust. We talk a lot about how self is not damaged by trauma, but a lot of people have parts who feel quite hopeless that all the years of dieting, right, the dieting or restricting, binging, disconnecting from their body really has left them without any kind of compass, that they really don't have the capacity. And so you have to do a lot of trust building so that you then have more of a sense of who's chiming in at any given moment. Like, is that coming from a part who thinks it would be good for me to go out for that walk? Or is that really from it's coming from self or is it coming from a part,
Yeah, I love
sort
that
of
because
thing.
it's been right, like years of this is how my parts have handled my body or handled food or handled exercise. So that's what I'm going to be. That's what the voices I'm used to.
And we get told all the time we can't trust ourselves. We have
Yeah.
to trust the latest expert who's going to tell us how many grams of protein we need. And I'm not saying to discard all nutritional information, but if you're considering it or consuming it, so to speak, from self, right? It's with a lot more perspective, right? It's with curiosity rather than a part that says, "Oh my gosh, I better get that, those certain grams of protein in a day or else," kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
I don't, how do you know what is like diet? Like, so I'm putting my quotes like diet culture. Like, how do I know? I don't know that you know the, I think I know what you're going to say. But how do I know what's like diet culture and what feels like healthy? Because sometimes I feel like I follow these things on Instagram and it feels very diet culture-y, but then I'm like, but is that healthy? I don't sometimes feel like I get confused. Like, what's the difference?
Well, we have, like I said before, healthism is a cultural legacy burden. So I would, to me, they both drive a lot of protectors. Because when somebody gets sick, what do you often hear? You often hear, what did they do?
Oh,
Right?
wow.
Yeah,
Okay. Like a blame.
or what didn't they do? Did they smoke? Oh, but they didn't exercise very much. Or they didn't really take care of themselves. There's a lot of moral value attributed to health, right? Again, and very connected to our legacy burdens around individualism and discipline, right? If you do the right thing, you can be healthy. So I think starting to get curious about your relationship to the word health is important also, and what that means. Because as you noticed, one of the things that happens as we age and our bodies change, there are lots of people who have a very hard time accepting the inevitable that go on with becoming older, rather than saying, oh, you know what? At this point in my life, running really doesn't support my knees. As much as parts of me would like to be that, Ironman, 80-year-old, the fact is it's actually hurting me. And so I can have a part that overrides it so that I'm really, knocking back a good amount of Advil. Or I can really, really from self help the parts grieve, So it's very confusing though. I really appreciate you bringing this up because the healthist beliefs were, I think, among the hardest for me, for parts of me, to wrap my head around. Because I grew up in a family where physical fitness was a big part of my life growing up. It was very much, I grew up in a family of runners. Lots of running, marathon running. I was like the slowest and like the most reluctant in that area. But we played a lot of sports growing up. And so for me, and I think I also had, um, my dad in particular, very focused on eating well, things like that. Grew up in an Italian family where everything was made from scratch, pretty much. So this idea of what is healthy, health is good, health is virtuous, kind of thing. Health is achievable. A lot of different beliefs parts of me had about health, which I don't have in the same way. I'm now much more curious about that. So I do think it's hard because people will often say, but I just want to be healthy. And again, what I would submit to you is that anything that's protector driven is a constraint. It's a constraint that has an impact on our systems, whether it's perpetuating or amplifying the shame or the sense of inadequacy that parts of us have, or anxiety. Because if you're really fit and achieving that goal today, you can pretty much be guaranteed that X years down the road, it's going to be harder you're not going to be able to sustain it just because of the inevitable changes. Right.
I don't like that you keep saying inevitable.
Right. I know. So what comes up though? What comes up for you? I'm curious.
Well, first I thought it was funny.
Mhm.
I think
Funny that it came up. You mean funny what was coming up for you?
No. I just thought it was, there's a part of me that was sort of just using her humor. Like, she keeps saying inevitable. I wish she would stop saying that. Like, there is that kind of, that part. I think there's this other part, because I heard this in my head just yesterday. Was it just yesterday? Because I was at a gym class that I really love doing. I love it. It makes me super happy. And they were celebrating someone's like 25th birthday. And I'm 50. And so I was looking around like, there's a lot of 20-year-olds in here. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do something like this. And I had that thought, and I was like, ooh, I don't know about that thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, who wants to think about inevitability? Yeah. We don't. That's one of the things that fuels parts of us. When I was 52, I went to a kickboxing class, and it was this unbelievably challenging kickboxing class. And you do it for the initial time, and then they meet with you afterwards. And this guy met with me afterwards and said, wow, I can't believe you could do that at your age, which, parts of me had feelings about, but all other parts of me were like, hooray, like they were so happy about it, because what it did for that moment was, oh, I'm really okay here. Look at what I can do. It's definitely gets me away from the parts that have any thoughts about inevitability, because we don't want to think about any kind of losses, right? We don't want to think about the fact that we have less muscle mass as we age, or what might happen. And I think the woman who wrote Fun Home, Alison Bechtel, talked poignantly about the fact that she at a certain point realized that in her fitness goals, she wasn't moving up. She wasn't trending. This wasn't a forward moving trajectory. And it was really quite a moment. And I think that in our 50s and definitely 60s, we're really coming upon some of that. And if we can hold our parts with compassion and being present to what they really need in this moment, there's so much abundance that can come from that, and also opportunities for grieving. But yeah, I understand why you don't like the word inevitability. I'm not a big fan myself.
If anything, so after I sort of said that, and as you were talking, I was thinking, I wonder if it almost has a little bit of a freeingness to it, right? Like there's sort of a freeness of like, if it's inevitable, then I don't know. I started feeling like maybe some more compassion, and like how I wanted to like be really nice to my body.
I think, unburdened is freer.
Yeah.
Right. What I love about IFS is its idea of it removes constraints. And these constraints placed on us from the time we arrive here, that there's just a narrow band of people whose bodies fit what's ideal, right? And the rest of us are in a deficit mode from the get-go. And if we aren't now, we will be. I mean, it is the opposite of freeing. So I do think that I think this is what we know from IFS also, that it can be painful to be with some of these burdens, these exiles and their pain. But if we can do that work, then it leads to much more, right? Much abundance and a freer feeling and access to so much more internally. So yeah, I'm excited anytime somebody says to me, I've never considered that I don't have to live like this, and I actually can have some hope about relating to my body in a much more compassionate way. That's really why I did this, and it feels so important to me to have the opportunity to speak with people, so that we're not all in our individual, foxholes trying to somehow make things better.
Yeah. Yeah. You said that to me before, like, you're not alone in this, you're not alone in that. And that was super helpful. I was like, yeah, it's like, I'm not, when it's not even just not alone in, me and my friends all talking about dieting and how much protein we're eating. You know what I mean? It's sort of, that can feel like, oh yeah, we're all dieting, we're all doing that. But the idea that I'm not alone in the compulsory or sort of the obsession, like of this, the diet culture stuff.
It's interesting you just said that, because I think the fact that we can seem like we're in it together when we're complaining about it together, but complaining about oppression together is actually not liberating.
Wow.
Right?
Right.
It's actually quite painful, because each of us at the end of the day has to go home to our own little, and how are we dealing with it by ourselves? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd probably come home from those and raid the refrigerator or something.
Most people I know, that's the practice. You have to do something to soothe after that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me, before we go, I have to talk about the comics and the
Oh,
comics or the
yeah.
drawings or the graphics in your book. You have an amazing flow chart that I know that you had said that other people do these, and I can't find it. I had highlighted it. But I love this flow chart of using the F's, but you do such a great job of explaining it with the graphics. So tell me about this.
Oh, well, first of all, just how I think it's in chapter 5, at the end of chapter 5. No, I don't know. You start to become aware of what page everything is on after a while. Other folks have done flowcharts, and I named a couple. I'm sure there are more, so I don't want to leave people out. But I knew Paul Neustadt shared one, and Paul Ginter at one point. And what I wanted to do with this book is to have it be for folks who didn't yet know about the IFS model. Of course, it's just going to give them a cursory overview. But I wanted for folks to have a graphic that really represented the relational aspects of the IFS model easily. And one of the things that I was so fortunate was to have Sasha Mardou's support in doing that. And so Sasha and I teamed up, and she developed the illustrations. And this flowchart was it's my favorite, along with the map of Leo's parts. And because I think the pictures lend that relational piece, they convey in just so effectively in these, and there's not a ton of graphics to it, but it was both the layout of it and the flow of it and the pictures that really, I think, help people get a sense of, there's a real, let me just see where I'm located. And the bottom left graphic, I said this when Sasha had a chance to present at the conference, that if you're having a hard time, get support. It just feels like these issues require a lot of support, from therapists
So I
and
found the flow
others.
chart. So I love this flow chart so much. So it starts with find a part, just so everybody kind of knows. So it's all the F's, like find a part, and you say like, can you find a part? And if it's like no, 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 then you just get support, get support. But if you can find a part, yes. And then it's just this beautiful way. It's the flow, it's the way it looks. I'm like, people should buy the book just for this flow chart. It's really good.
That makes so many parts of me happy, because, it was, like I said, we really wanted to have something that very concisely and effectively conveyed the heart of IFS. And I feel like this chart does it. And I love where this woman has her hand on her heart, right? She's going inside.
Yes,
It's just, so thank you for sharing that. I love it. So it's nice to know that it felt good to you to see that.
It did, yeah. And Sasha's amazing. And the one with the facial expressions and like the tension in the face. I mean, it's unbelievable. Is there anything else we want to talk about with the book? I'm sure there's more before I can ask you the question about Dick.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, I think Sasha and I are hoping to collaborate on more related to the book, because what we really want to do is help, providing the Sasha's way of conveying this work is so profound and so effective, and I think it engages many more of the parts, along with the words and the writing that I do. So I'm just really happy to be, looking for other opportunities. But no, you can move on to asking about Dick.
Okay, so for people that don't know, Dick is Jeanne's husband. And Dick is the founder of IFS, of this incredible model that we have. And so here's my question for you, Jeanne. Is it really annoying when you're writing a book and you have to quote Dick? Because I'm imagining you're like, you know what, I just picked up your shoes and you keep leaving your shoes on the floor, and now I have to quote you in my book? Like, no.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of that, sure. Not about the quote, but it took me a long time to write the book, because while I was writing the book, I was doing what I do here, which is handling a lot of our day-to-day, but then also we moved. So we moved from Boston to Wilmette. So that was challenging. It's interesting. When we first met, people would say things like, "Do you do anything?" Literally, when I would travel with him. And, I came from New York City. I'd been specializing in working with eating disorders and trauma since the mid-90s and had a large practice in Manhattan. So this was an interesting experience for me, for people to not have any idea of what I did, and I kind of just trusted, with a lot of support from Dick also, who had never had any agenda for what I would do within the IFS community, really. And of course, now we're working much more closely together in terms of the Institute. And so that's really changed. But I do feel like one of the things that felt really important to me was not to center my voice and his voice in this book, because it really had so much to do with the cultural legacy burdens that come to bear in people's relationships with food and the body. And so as a white woman with a lot of unearned privilege, I could certainly talk about my lived experience of having a body and having relationships with food and that body, but really it felt much more important to come on later on in the book. And it also felt important to center other people's voices earlier on. But he developed this model, and it has been, we met through my work with eating disorder clients. So I was referring to a facility where he was training the therapists in IFS and all of the staff. And it was really quite remarkable, the transformations that they were going through by using IFS. So the fact that this model has transformed my work with people with eating disorders and disordered eating, and that it led me to write this book, I felt really in a couple of places, it felt like just right to have his quote there, right? To really honor that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a girl question now. But he was he was training therapist at this eating disorder center. And were you like, ooh, he's cute? Like, what happened that he was like this big wig training people, and you were this big wig in Manhattan, and you like went on a date or something?
All right. I wasn't a big wig in Manhattan, but I had my own, thing going on. So I trained in somatic experiencing and EMDR and psychodynamic psychotherapy, and I was really, really involved in, very interested in somatic experiencing at the time when I met Dick. But I started referring my clients to this facility, and they started changing. And I thought, well, that seems interesting. But I just thought, I've already done a lot of trainings. But my closest friend at the time wanted to go to Esalen. And she said, "I'm going to Esalen to hear Dick Schwartz speak. Would you like to come?" And my sister and I were already planning to go to the Yoga Journal conference. I did not go to Esalen with that in mind. I actually didn't really even know what he looked like. Actually didn't know what he looked like. So I thought the first night at Esalen, he was another participant. Then realized he was the leader. And in part because he was so kind of milling about, just being a regular guy, as Dick does, right? So I got kind of met up with that aspect of him immediately, this accessibility. And once I learned IFS, I was fortunate to do a demo in that Esalen retreat. And once I had the direct experience to add to what I noticed with my clients, it felt like, oh, I really need to learn this. This is really something different. And I became really excited about learning the model. So I noticed at some point during that week that I thought he was attractive, but that wasn't front and center. And it wasn't until a while later that we connected. But
went on a date.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where did you go on your first date? You started talking because you had a long distance relationship for a while.
We did.
Yeah.
We did. And I didn't think it was a good idea to be in this. I did not think it was a good idea. Well, I didn't actually have a sense of and at that time it wasn't nearly the size, but the size of the IFS community. And Dick lived across the country, and he was older, and I thought those things didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
So what we did was we just started chatting. We started just talking on the phone. And, Dick knows how to charm managers, right? So he just knew exactly, I just have to chat with, I have to cool it, get my parts a step back, and just be, and interesting and smart and funny. And, so we ended up having lots and lots of conversations. And then our first date, he came to New York City. He was doing something close to the city, and that's where I was still living. And so we just went out to dinner in the city. Yeah.
That's great.
So,
Did you ever think you would live in Chicago?
never. Well, no, I actually didn't. I mean, during the pandemic, I started to, when we were separated from Dick has 3 wonderful girls and their husbands. And then at the time we had 2 grandchildren. And so during the pandemic, we started to realize how far that was, because before we could get on a plane and come here for a few days or a week at a time. But that really, it started to hit home like, okay, maybe we'll make our way out to Chicago. I didn't actually think, I really loved Boston. I thought it was a great place to be, and I loved the community we had there. I'm really happy to be here. It's really nice. We now have 6 grandchildren. They're all fabulous, and we're fortunate in that way. Yeah. And the IFS community is so lovely, right? And what's nice now about our virtual world is we could move and still, we miss people from Boston, and we still have opportunities to connect with people. So
yeah. Okay, so last question, then I'll let you go.
I didn't know I was going to speak so personally, but I'm glad.
I'm glad you did. So last question I ask on the podcast. Yeah. A non-Dick personal question. So if you could do something different in your life and you had to do something different, what would you do instead of all the work that you do now?
I'm right now so engrossed in the Great British Bake Off that people have been telling me about this for years because they know me and they know that I would like this. I years ago discovered this woman who has cooking classes in her home in Tuscany. She's lovely. She's written a couple of cookbooks. And what she does is she just invites in groups of people and teaches them how to cook. And this is so, I grew up with much more connection to my Italian grandparents and food and just the way of being, and a lot of heirlooms from that, like a lot of rich practices. And so I think, and I love cooking is so connecting and celebratory. And when you ask where we are, and I'm reminded of during the pandemic, a website where the women in Italy who went into lockdown first, pretty much, started sharing pictures of the view from their kitchens.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
And how moving that was to me. It was so connecting because it's warmth, it's the hearth, right? And they were sharing recipes. And so this idea that food is love, it's connection. It can also be such a source of pain and scarcity, of course. I want to name that. But for some folks, it's just they can't get it. They don't have enough. But it's just, this wonderfully connecting, loving kind of activity. So yes, I would like to be a cook, not a chef, because I don't really like long hours in a kitchen. Yeah. And I do want people to do my dishes too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But I can imagine you in like a little cottage in Tuscany with like some vineyards out. And then, yes, and you could have like some people that come in and help you, like bring you fresh bread and help you with the dishes. And yeah.
You could be my producer.
I love it. Yeah. Let's do it.
The architect of my dream. Thank you. Yeah, that would work.
That sounds good to me. Yeah. Jeanne, well, this is great. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work and just making this happen. So
thank you, Tammy. I really loved being here. Thank you.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you left a rating, a review, a like, comment, share with your family, your friends. That would mean so much to me. My book is available at your favorite independent bookstore or on Amazon. You can visit my website, tammysallenberger.com, or you can download a free Get to Know a Should part of you. You can follow me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and at The One Inside on Facebook and on YouTube. Jeff Schrum co-produces The One Inside, and I am forever grateful for Jeff. Also thankful for Jack Reardon for creating the music, and just thank you for listening. 6 seasons, over 1 million downloads. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you and this community. I'll see you next time.